March 1, 1896. The mountains of northern Ethiopia. 20,000 Italian soldiers march toward what they believe will be an easy colonial conquest. They expect scattered resistance, primitive weapons, a quick victory before breakfast. Instead, they find 100,000 Ethiopian warriors waiting in perfect formation. At the center stands Emperor Menelik II, a man who has spent a decade preparing for this exact moment. Beside him, Empress Betul, who has personally mobilized armies and convinced skeptical regional leaders that unity is their only hope. Italy believes Ethiopia is just another piece of Africa waiting to be claimed. They have no idea they're walking into the most catastrophic defeat a European power will suffer in Africa during the entire colonial era. But how did Ethiopia alone among African nations manage to defeat a modern European army? What did Menelik know that every other African leader didn't? And what price would Ethiopia pay for this victory? This is the story of the Battle of Adwa, the day Africa proved it could not be broken. To understand why ADWA matters, we need to go back 15 years earlier to a conference room in Berlin during the winter of 1884. Inside that room, European powers are drawing lines on a map of Africa. No Africans are present. No one asked permission. The entire continent is being divided like a cake at a dinner party, with each European nation claiming its slice. Britain takes vast territories in the east and south. France claims enormous stretches of western North Africa. Germany secures strategic territories. Belgium's King Leopold II claims the Congo Basin as his personal property, a decision that will lead to one of history's greatest atrocities. Portugal expands its centuries-old coastal holdings. Spain takes smaller territories in the northwest and along the Gulf of Guinea. In Italy arrives late to colonialism. Unified only in 1861, the new Italian state desperately wants to prove itself as a great power. It wants an empire to match Britain and France. It wants prestige, resources, and global recognition. Italy looks at the map and sees one region still largely unclaimed, the Horn of Africa. The Italians establish a foothold in Eritrea along the Red Sea coast in 1885. It's a strategic position controlling important trade routes. From there, they begin eyeing the ancient kingdom directly to the south, Ethiopia. But Ethiopia is not like other African territories. It has never been colonized. It has existed as an independent kingdom for thousands of years, with its own alphabet, its own Christian church dating back to the 4th century, and its own complex political structure. More importantly, Ethiopia has something most African kingdoms lack in 1885. A highly organized state with a functioning central government, a battle-hardened warrior tradition, and a leader who understands exactly what Europe is doing to Africa. That leader is Menelik. Menelik is born in 1844 in the Shan region of central Ethiopia. His birth name is Sulla Mariam. He grows up during a chaotic period in Ethiopian history known as the Zni Mesophant, the era of princes when regional lords constantly fight each other for power and the empire fragments into competing kingdoms. As a child, Menelik witnesses his father's defeat by a rival emperor. He's taken hostage and held for 10 years in the imperial capital, but this captivity becomes his education. He learns statecraft, military strategy, diplomacy, and most importantly, he learns patience. When he finally escapes and returns to Shah in 1865, he's 21 years old and determined to rebuild his father's kingdom. Over the next 24 years, he transforms Shawa from a struggling province into the most powerful region in Ethiopia. He modernizes the army. He establishes trade relationships with European powers, carefully playing them against each other. He imports modern rifles, thousands of them, while other Ethiopian leaders cling to traditional weapons. He builds infrastructure, establishes a postal system, and creates a telegraph network. Most importantly, he watches what's happening in the rest of Africa. He sees ancient kingdoms fall to European armies. He studies their tactics, their weapons, their strategies. He notices a pattern. African kingdoms fall because they fight alone, because they underestimate European military technology, and because they fail to adapt. Menelik decides Ethiopia will not make these mistakes. In 1889, Emperor Johannes IV dies in battle against modest forces from Sudan. Menelik, now 45 years old, claims the imperial throne. He becomes Emperor of Ethiopia, King of Kings, and the elect of God. Traditional titles that carry immense weight. But Menelik knows titles mean nothing if he cannot protect his empire from the European powers circling like vultures. He needs weapons. He needs diplomatic recognition. He needs time to consolidate Ethiopian unity. And that's when Italy makes its move. The Italians see an opportunity. A new emperor means potential instability. They approach Menelik with an offer: diplomatic support, modern weapons, and financial assistance in exchange for a treaty of friendship. On May 2, 189, just months after taking the throne, Menelik signs the Treaty of Wale with Italian representatives. The treaty is written in two languages, Italian and Amharic, Ethiopia's official language. Both sides negotiate in good faith, or so it seems. The treaty grants Italy certain trade privileges. It defines borders between Ethiopia and Italian-controlled Eritrea. It establishes diplomatic protocols. And then there's Article 17. In the Amharic version, Article 17 states that Emperor Menelik may use Italian diplomatic channels for communications with other European powers if he wishes. Mayor's optional a courtesy. But in the Italian version, the wording is different. Article 17 states that Emperor Menelik will use Italian diplomatic channels for all communications with European powers. Must, mandatory, required. It's a subtle difference with enormous implications. Italy begins telling other European powers that Ethiopia has agreed to become an Italian protectorate, essentially a colony by another name. Under international law at the time, if Ethiopia is an Italian protectorate, Italy controls Ethiopia's foreign policy. At the Berlin Conference, European powers agreed not to interfere with each other's colonial claims. If Italy can convince everyone that Ethiopia belongs to Italy, no other European power will sell weapons to Ethiopia or recognize Ethiopian sovereignty. Menelik doesn't realize what has happened immediately. The treaty brings him modern rifles, 40,000 of them. It brings diplomatic recognition. It gives him breathing room to consolidate power. But slowly, troubling reports reach his court. Italian newspapers are calling Ethiopia Italian East Africa. Italian diplomats are blocking Ethiopian representatives from meeting with other European powers. Italian military forces are pushing deeper into Ethiopian territory beyond the agreed borders, establishing forts and garrisons. In 1890, Menelik sends representatives to Rome to discuss trade agreements. The Italians refuse to meet with them, saying that as subjects of an Italian protectorate, Ethiopians cannot conduct independent foreign policy. That's when Menelik pulls out both versions of the treaty and compares them word by word. The mistranslation is clear. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate deception. Menelik is furious, but he doesn't show it. He's learned patience. Instead, he begins a careful diplomatic campaign, writing letters to European powers explaining the discrepancy. He sends representatives to Britain, France, and Russia with copies of both treaty versions. Some European leaders are sympathetic but cautious. Italy is a European power. Ethiopia is an African kingdom. Most Europeans assume Africa belongs to Europe by natural right. For 3 years, Menelik tries diplomacy. He offers compromises. He suggests renegotiations. He appeals to international law. Italy refuses every offer. They insist the Italian version of the treaty is correct in that Ethiopia must accept protectorate status. Finally, on February 12, 1893, Menelik sends a letter to Italian King Alberto. The message is clear and final. The Treaty of Wale is null and void. Ethiopia will not be an Italian protectorate. Ethiopia will not submit, but none of them expected what Italy would decide next. In Rome, Italian politicians are divided. Some recognize that Ethiopia is not a typical colonial target. It has a large population, a functioning government, and a military tradition, stretching back centuries. But others see only opportunity and wounded music, pride. Italy has staked its international reputation on controlling Ethiopia. If they back down now, they'll be humiliated before all of Europe. The Italian press has spent years portraying Ethiopia as a primitive kingdom waiting to be civilized. The public expects colonial expansion. More importantly, there's a political calculation. Italy's government is unstable. Prime Minister Francesco Crispi needs a foreign victory to distract from domestic problems and unite the nation behind his leadership. Crispi is a hardline nationalist who believes deeply in Italy's right to empire. He looks at a map and sees that Italy controls Eritrea to the north of Ethiopia. If they can conquer Ethiopia, they'll control the entire Horn of Africa, a massive territory that would make Italy a major colonial power overnight. He believes the military assessment Ethiopian armies use outdated tactics. They lack modern artillery. Their forces are undisciplined. Italian troops have modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery pieces. Italian officers are trained in European military might. On paper, Italy should win easily. Crispi authorizes the military buildup. Throughout 1894 and 1895, Italy pours resources into Eritrea. They ship thousands of troops from Italy. They build supply depots and roads. They stockpile ammunition and artillery shells. The Italian commander in Eritrea is General Oreste Baratieri, a veteran colonial officer who has fought in multiple campaigns. He's confident, experienced, and deeply underestimates his opponent. Baratieri begins pushing Italian forces south from Eritrea into Ethiopian territory, seizing strategic positions. He captures border forts and establishes Italian garrisons deep inside Ethiopia. Each Italian advance is a test. Baratieri expects Ethiopian resistance to crumble. Instead, he finds coordinated defensive responses. Ethiopian forces retreat strategically, avoiding decisive battles while harassing Italian supply lines. Menelik watches these provocations carefully. He knows Italy wants him to react hastily to send poorly organized forces into battle before he's ready. So he waits. And while he waits, he prepares. Menelik understands something fundamental that many African leaders missed. Defeating a European army requires more than bravery. It requires organization, unity, logistics, music, intelligence, and timing. First, he needs weapons. Modern weapons. Fortunately, European powers are happy to sell weapons to anyone who can pay, even if it undermines their colonial ambitions. Britain and France have no love for Italy's expansion in the Horn of Africa, as it threatens their own interests. Russia, an Orthodox Christian nation, has cultural sympathy for Ethiopia's ancient Orthodox Church. Menelik exploits these rivalries brilliantly. He purchases modern rifles from France, lots of them. He buys artillery pieces from Russia. He acquires ammunition from Swiss and Belgian arms dealers. British merchants in Aden sell him weapons, claiming they didn't know the final destination. By 1895, Ethiopia has stockpiled approximately 100,000 modern rifles and dozens of artillery pieces. It's an enormous arsenal equal to or exceeding what Italy has in Eritrea. But weapons alone won't win the war. Mensch needs something harder to achieve. Unity. Ethiopia in 1895 is not a centralized nation-state like Italy. It's a federation of regions, each with its own leader, culture, and interests. The regional lords called races have their own armies and often compete with each other for power and resources. Historically, when Ethiopia faces external threats, regional leaders squabble instead of uniting. Previous Ethiopian emperors have fallen because they couldn't get regional lords to cooperate. Menelik begins a patient diplomatic campaign to unite Ethiopia's regional powers behind his leadership. He sends messengers to every major RA, explaining the threat Italy poses, not just to his throne, but to Ethiopian independence itself. He appeals to national pride. He appeals to religious identity. Ethiopians see themselves as defenders of Christian Africa. He makes political deals offering regional autonomy and power sharing in exchange for military cooperation. Some races join immediately, others hesitate. A few actively resist. That's when Empress Betul enters the story force. Betul is not simply Menelik's wife. She's a political force in her own right. Born around 1851 into Ethiopian nobility, music, Titu grows up in the imperial court during the era of princes. She's educated, politically astute, and deeply ambitious. Her family connections give her influence across multiple regions. She marries Menelik in 1883, her fourth marriage and his second. It's a political alliance that becomes a genuine partnership. Menelik respects Tetu's intelligence and political instincts. Ethiopia needs to actually get its forces to the front. And that presents an enormous logistical challenge. In September 1895, Menelik issues a national call to arms. The message spreads across Ethiopia through messengers, church networks, and regional proclamations. What follows is one of the largest military mobilizations in African history. From Shawa, Menelik's home region, come tens of thousands of warriors. From Tra in the north, the powerful Rosalila brings battle-hardened veterans who have fought Italians before. From Gojam in the west, Ras Teklahanat leads his forces. From Wallo, Ras Mikhail brings cavalry and infantry. The regional leaders bring not just soldiers, but entire support systems. Every fighting man needs food, water, and ammunition. Each regional army includes camp, followers, supplies, livestock, music, and equipment. Ethiopian military tradition is unique. Warriors are not professional soldiers in the European sense. They're farmers, herders, and craftsmen who take up arms when called. But they're trained from youth in combat skills, horsemanship, and tactics. Many have fought in regional conflicts and border wars. They carry a mix of traditional and modern weapons. Some have modern rifles purchased by Menelik. Others carry older firearms. Many still bring traditional weapons, swords, spears, and shields. Music, not because they're primitive, but because ammunition is limited in close combat might be necessary. Ethiopian cavalry is particularly formidable. Horsemen trained from childhood can cover vast distances quickly and execute complex maneuvers. They're scouts, raiders, and shock troops all at once. The mobilization takes months. Regional armies must travel hundreds of miles, often through difficult mountainous terrain. They must coordinate movements, establish supply lines, and maintain organization. By December 1895, Ethiopian forces begin concentrating in the north near the border with Italian-occupied Eritrea. Conservative estimates put the total force at around 100,000 warriors. Some historians suggest the number might be even higher. It's an enormous army by any standard, larger than the total population of many African kingdoms. Coordinating such a force is a staggering logistical achievement. Menelik establishes his headquarters and begins organizing the forces into a coherent structure. Regional armies maintain their own commands but coordinate under overall imperial strategy. Ethiopian scouts begin monitoring Italian movements closely. Meanwhile, in Eritrea, General Baratieri is growing concerned. Italian intelligence reports the massive Ethiopian buildup. Baratieri realizes this isn't the scattered resistance he expected. This is a national mobilization on a scale that challenges his assumptions. But Baratieri faces his own problems. His forces are stretched thin across occupied territories. Supply lines from Italy are long and unreliable. His troops are increasingly demoralized as they realize the enemy they face is not weak or disorganized. Worse, political pressure from Rome is mounting. Prime Minister Crispi demands action. Italian newspapers criticize Baratieri for being too cautious. The Italian public expects a quick, decisive victory. Baratieri wants to wait to build up his forces further, music, to let the Ethiopian army's logistics collapse under its own weight, feeding 100,000 men in the field is extraordinarily difficult. He hopes time is on his side, but time is running out for Baratieri. In December 1895, Menelik decides to take the initiative. Waiting too long will exhaust his supplies and allow Italy to reinforce. He orders Ethiopian forces to begin offensive operations. The first major engagement happens at Ambalaji, a strategic mountain fortress where Italian forces have established a garrison. Ethiopian forces under Ros McConnell's most capable commanders surround the position in early December. The Italians hold out for weeks, expecting relief that never comes. Finally, on December 7th, the garrison surrenders. Major Petro Telli, the Italian commander, is killed in the final assault. Over 2,000 Italian and Eritrean troops become prisoners. It's a shocking defeat for Italy. European armies don't surrender to African forces. The news causes consternation in Rome and celebrates in Addis Ababa. But Menelik isn't finished. In mid-January 1896, Ethiopian forces attack another Italian position at Mekelle, a fortified town where Baratieri has concentrated a significant garrison. The siege of Mekelle lasts 2 weeks. Ethiopian forces cut off water supplies and bombard the Italian positions with their Russian artillery. The Italian garrison commanded by Major Yepi Galliano holds out desperately hoping for relief. Baratieri attempts to break the siege, but his forces can't reach Mekelle in time. On January 21st, with his troops dying of thirst and running out of ammunition, Galliano negotiates a surrender. This time, Menelik makes a calculated decision. Instead of taking the Italians prisoner, he allows them to retreat to Aratra, requiring them to leave all weapons and equipment behind. It's a brilliant psychological move. The defeated Italian soldiers return to Aratra and spread demoralization through the Italian ranks. They tell stories of massive Ethiopian armies, coordinated tactics, and effective artillery. They describe an enemy who fights with courage and discipline. Baratier's position becomes increasingly untenable. He's lost 2 significant garrisons without inflicting serious damage on Ethiopian forces. His troops are demoralized. His supply situation is deteriorating. And then on February 8, 1896, he receives a telegram from Prime Minister Crispy that changes everything. The message is brief and brutal. Win a decisive victory immediately or you will be replaced with someone who can. Baratieri understands what this means. His career, his reputation, and his honor are at stake. He must attack and he must win. But he has no idea what Menelik has prepared for him. Baratieri finally decides on a plan. He will advance south with his entire available force, seek a decisive battle with the main Ethiopian army, and use superior Italian firepower and tactics to break Ethiopian resistance. He assembles approximately 20,000 troops. About 15,000 are Italian soldiers, with the remainder being Eritrean askari, local soldiers fighting for the Italians. He brings artillery batteries, machine guns, and substantial ammunition. Reserves. His plan is to move quickly and surprise Ethiopian forces before they can fully concentrate. He hopes to catch regional Ethiopian armies separated and defeat them in detail. On February 29, 1896, Italian forces begin marching south from their positions in Eritrea, heading toward the town of Adwa, where Ethiopian forces are concentrated. The march happens at night, intended to achieve surprise and avoid the harsh daytime heat. Bir divides his force into 4 brigade-sized columns, each following separate mountain paths that should converge near Adwa at dawn. It's an ambitious plan that requires precise coordination in difficult terrain. But Baratieri makes a critical mistake. His maps are inaccurate. The mountain passes around Adwa are poorly surveyed. Ethiopian scouts have been monitoring Italian movements for weeks and understand the terrain perfectly. Menelik knows the Italians are coming. Ethiopian scouts shadow the Italian columns throughout the night, sending runners back to update Menelik on Italian positions and movements. Instead of being surprised, Menelik is ready, yet he has positioned his forces across the hills and valleys surrounding Adwa in a massive crescent formation. Ethiopian armies occupy high ground with commanding views of the approaches. As dawn breaks on March 31, 1896, the Italian columns are scattered across difficult terrain, struggling to maintain coordination. They've marched all night through mountain passes. They're tired, strung out, music, and no longer in tight formation. And that's when they see what's waiting for them. Across the hills surrounding Adwa stand Ethiopian forces as far as the eye can see. Tens of thousands of warriors in organized formations. Artillery batteries positioned on high ground. Cavalry units ready to exploit any weakness. The Italian officers experience a moment of terrible realization. Music, they're not catching an unprepared enemy by surprise. They've walked into a prepared defensive position held by a force that outnumbers them 5-1. But it's too late to retreat. The battle has already begun. The first shots of the Battle of Adwa ring out around 5:30 a.m. as Italian advanced guards make contact with Ethiopian forward positions. General Beretier's brigade commanders quickly realize their situation is far worse than expected. The four Italian columns that were supposed to converge in coordinated fashion are separated by rugged terrain. They can't support each other effectively. The rightmost Italian column, commanded by General Vittorio Dormita, is furthest from the other Italian forces. He's moving through a valley with Ethiopian forces on the surrounding heights. In the center, brigades under Generals Matteo Alberto and Joseph Arimundi are encountering the main Ethiopian positions. They're taking fire from multiple directions as Ethiopian forces on the high ground pour rifle fire into the Italian columns. The leftmost column under General Joseph Elena is struggling to advance through difficult terrain while under constant harassment from Ethiopian skirmishers. Beretieri, positioned with the reserve forces, tries to coordinate his scattered brigades. But communication is nearly impossible in the chaos of battle. Runners can't move quickly through the mountainous terrain. The Italian columns are fighting what amounts to 4 separate battles instead of one coordinated action. Menelik, positioned on high ground near the center of Ethiopian forces, has clear visibility of most of the battlefield. He's coordinated with his regional commanders beforehand, and each knows their role. The Ethiopian battle plan is sophisticated. Hold the high ground. Use superior numbers to envelope Italian columns. Preserve ammunition by choosing targets carefully. Use cavalry to exploit breakthroughs and cut off retreating units. General Alberton's brigade, advancing in the center, runs directly into the main Ethiopian position held by forces under Ras Alila and other Tigran warriors. These are veterans who have fought Italians before and know their tactics. Ethiopian artillery opens up, firing shells into the Italian formations. The Italians are shocked to find themselves under effective artillery fire. They assumed Ethiopian artillery would be poorly trained or ineffective. Alberton's brigade begins taking heavy casualties. Italian soldiers are trained to fight in tight formations with coordinated volley fire, but Ethiopian forces are using the terrain effectively, advancing and retreating fluidly, making the Italian formations vulnerable to enfilading fire. Around 6:30 a.m., after less than an hour of fighting, Alberton realizes his brigade is in danger of being surrounded. He tries to pull back to more defensible positions, but the retreat quickly becomes disorganized. Ethiopian cavalry, waiting for exactly this moment, charges into the disorganized Italian units. Warriors armed with swords and spears crash into Italian formations that are already wavering under rifle fire. The fighting becomes hand-to-hand. Italian soldiers trained to shoot at distant targets suddenly find themselves in close combat with Ethiopian warriors who have trained with swords from childhood. It's brutal, chaotic, and terrifying. Alberton's brigade begins to collapse. Thousands of Italian soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured. Alberton himself is captured along with many of his officers. By 8 a.m., the Italian center has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. But the battle is far from over. While the center collapses, General Dormita's brigade on the Italian right flank is marching deeper into a trap. Dormita has poor maps and limited visibility. He believes he's moving to envelope the Ethiopian left flank. In reality, he's marching into a valley surrounded by Ethiopian forces on 3 sides. Ethiopian regional armies under Ras Michael of Wollo and other commanders have positioned themselves perfectly to ambush Dabarita's column. They hold their fire, letting the Italian brigade march deeper into the valley. When Bereta finally realizes his situation, around 9 a.m., Ethiopian forces open fire from 3 directions simultaneously. His brigade is caught in a devastating crossfire. Betul tries to fight his way out, but there's no good direction to retreat. Ethiopian forces block every escape route. His artillery is overwhelmed. His infantry formations are shredded by rifle fire from the surrounding heights. The situation degenerates into a desperate struggle for survival. Italian soldiers fight in small groups, trying to find cover in terrain that offers none. Ethiopian warriors advanced steadily, maintaining fire discipline and using superior numbers to envelope and isolate Italian units. By 10 a.m., Bormada's brigade has been effectively annihilated. General Dormada himself dies in the fighting. Whether killed in combat or taking his own life to avoid capture remains disputed. Of the 4,000 men in Beret's brigade, fewer than 200 will escape back to Eritrea. The rest are dead, wounded or captured. Meanwhile, General Aramandi's brigade in the center-left is fighting desperately to maintain any coherent defensive position. After Alberton's collapse, Aramandi is facing the full weight of Menelik's central forces. Empress II is personally present in this sector, coordinating supply lines and ensuring ammunition reaches Ethiopian forces. Contemporary accounts describe her rallying troops and directing movements. A remarkable sight that Italian prisoners later recall with a mixture of respect and disbelief. Aramandi's men fight with courage, maintaining disciplined volley fire even as Ethiopian forces press from multiple sides. Italian artillery does good work, temporarily checking Ethiopian advances with devastating shellfire. But ammunition is running low. The Italians are outnumbered. Their flanks are exposed with Alberton captured and Dreda destroyed. Around 11 a.m., Ethiopian forces make a major push against Aramandi's position. Thousands of warriors charge simultaneously from multiple directions. The Italian defensive line wavers, then breaks. General Aramandi, trying to rally his men, is killed in the fighting. His brigade begins a fighting retreat that quickly becomes a rout. As organization collapses, Italian soldiers throw away their equipment and run. Ethiopian cavalry pursues, cutting down fleeing men. The retreat becomes a massacre. Only General Elalanina's brigade on the Italian left remains relatively intact, and only because it hasn't yet been fully engaged. Elena, seeing the disaster unfolding, orders an immediate retreat before his brigade suffers the same fate. By noon, the Battle of Adwa is effectively over. The Italian army is shattered. Thousands of Italian soldiers are dead or dying on the battlefield. Thousands more are captured. The survivors are fleeing in complete disorder back toward Eritrea. Baritari, watching the destruction of his army, has no choice but to retreat with the remnants. His career is over. His army is destroyed. And Italy's colonial ambitions in Ethiopia have been decisively crushed. But what happened next nearly shattered Ethiopia's hopes. The immediate aftermath of Adwa is chaos. The battlefield is covered with the dead and wounded from both sides. Ethiopian casualties are significant, estimated between 7,000 and 10,000 killed and wounded. It's a heavy price, but in proportion to their total forces, it's sustainable. Ethiopian Medical Corps moves through the battlefield, recovering wounded warriors. Italian casualties are catastrophic. Approximately 6,000 Italian and Eritrean soldiers are dead. Another 1,500 are wounded. Nearly 3,000 are captured. For a European army, these are shocking losses. Entire regiments have been wiped out. Multiple general officers are dead or captured. The Italian command structure in East Africa has effectively ceased to exist. But Menelik faces an immediate crisis. What to do with thousands of prisoners? Feeding, guarding, and transporting 3,000 prisoners is an enormous logistical burden. Ethiopian forces are already stretched maintaining their own supply lines. There's pressure from some quarters to simply execute the prisoners. In Ethiopian military tradition, captured enemies are sometimes killed to prevent them from returning to fight again. Menelik makes a controversial but strategically brilliant decision. He will treat the Italian prisoners humanely. He knows the world is watching. European powers are waiting to see if Ethiopia will commit atrocities against white prisoners, which would give them moral justification for intervention.